All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on our webinar today. For those of you who aren't familiar with using the Zoom platform, give you a little quick insight here. If you go down and you see you've got like a bar that you should be able to see chat button. If you go ahead and hit that and let us know where you're calling in from so we can see where we've got folks attending the webinar from today. And as we get everyone signed in, we'll get going here in just a minute. And I see Michelle calling in from Greenfield, Mass. So thanks, Michelle, for coming to join us. Brad coming from Cornell in Ithaca. Thanks for being here. Douglas all the way from Munich. Not involved with Oktoberfest today. And well, I guess that already happened about a month ago. So thanks for joining us, Douglas, from way over on the other side of the pond. Folks coming in from Washington, from Ottawa, up in Algonquin. Diana, thanks for being with us. And see lots of folks calling in Wisconsin, Maryland, Arkansas, New York, Tannersville, Pennsylvania, Northampton Community College. Alicia, happy to hear from you. We're going to be up there in a few weeks. Hopefully we'll see you then. Destiny calling in from Greensboro. Steve from Saranac Lake. So just a sample there of folks who are calling in for our webinar today, and thanks for being here with the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative to go over these concepts around the entrepreneurial mindset today. So welcome to our webinar. I am Rob Herndon. I'm the president of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative, and I'm joining you from Williamsburg, Virginia, and happy to be here with you today. I also have on the line Nick Houle, who is our client engagement specialist, and he's calling in from Cleveland Heights, Ohio, up in the Cleveland area.
Hi, everybody.
And Nick will be on the line as I'm presenting so that I'm not trying to multitask too much. He'll be answering any questions that he can as we go along. So if you do have a question as I'm presenting, feel free to put that in the chat box, and Nick will try and get to that. If it's something he doesn't feel like he wants to answer, or can't, not wants to, but can answer, or he thinks that maybe everybody should hear the answer, he may ask me to talk about that question a little bit. So we'll see how that goes and make sure we try and hit all of your questions today. How this is going to time out is I'm going to take the first 15 or 20 minutes and talk about the philosophy behind our work here at Eli. And then we'll take a little break for some questions. Then I'm going to give you a rundown on our Ice House Entrepreneurship Program, how it came into being, and the general structure of the program. And then about the last 15 minutes or so, I'll talk about the impact that the program has had on students, on individuals, on communities around the world. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. And I'll get my slides going here, and we'll go ahead with the presentation. All right, so as I mentioned, Rob Herndon from the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. You can find us on Twitter at Eli Mindset and all the other social media platforms. If you connect with us, or you'll receive an email after this webinar that'll have how you can connect with us in a number of ways. And depending on how you've heard about us before, you may not know exactly what we're all about, but essentially we provide professional development programs, be that through our facilitator training for our Ice House programs, or various keynotes and workshops that we hold regularly and can come on site to do as well. And all with the idea of getting a broader understanding of the entrepreneurial mindset out into the world to help our individuals, organizations, and communities thrive. So we'll be talking more about how you can get in contact with us towards the end of the webinar, and just please feel to reach out afterwards when Nick sends the follow-up email. All right, so we're here to talk about the entrepreneurial mindset. So let's start diving into how we at Eli look at this work that we're doing. So ultimately, if you talk about entrepreneurship, Many folks maybe have this image of Mr. Mark Zuckerberg, who's been in the news recently, even just yesterday and today, talking about some of the new things Facebook is doing with their currency, et cetera. But we feel from our perspective that when entrepreneurship is only understood through this lens, through this sort of public lens, where it's only the folks that you're seeing in the news. Many times it's these, high growth entrepreneurs. If it's not Zuckerberg, it's Richard Branson, or it's the folks on Shark Tank. They're all talking about entrepreneurship from a traditional business focused, high growth, venture capital backed type of model. And from our perspective at Eli, how we like to look at entrepreneurship is through a behavioral perspective. We like to understand how entrepreneurs think. We're not really as concerned about the ins and outs of the entrepreneurial business, what it takes to actually, finance a company and the laws around that, and sort of those typical things that are taught in most entrepreneurship curriculum around the world, maybe after you have a business and how you can actually manage and run that business. We're looking at it more from a behavioral perspective. So we feel like we can't understand this entrepreneurial mindset if we're limited in the ways in how we understand entrepreneurship. And this Zuckerberg image, or maybe looking at it as only a small business, Main Street type of entrepreneurship, can very much limit the folks that come into our conversation to talk to us about what entrepreneurship means. And so we try and get away from that by talking about it from this behavioral perspective, which I'll expand more on as we move forward here. So, okay, how is it that Eli then defines entrepreneurship? Let me see if I can run this down for you. We like Professor Howard Stevenson. He's an ex-professor at Harvard, longtime professor of entrepreneurship at the Harvard Business School. We like this definition because we think it gets to the core of what entrepreneurship is truly all about. And his description here as entrepreneurship as the pursuit of opportunity beyond resources controlled, it's a little clunky, it's a little academic, which is why we, in sort of colloquial terms, talk about it as an opportunity discovery process. Ultimately, that's what entrepreneurs are doing. They're looking out at the world and they're trying to think about their own interests and abilities. Like, what am I interested in? What do I have some type of ability in? Those overlap in some way. I'm interested in baseball. I was rooting for the Nationals last night. Sorry, Astros fans that are out there. But doesn't mean I was necessarily going to be able to be a Major League Baseball player. So there is some overlap there between our interests and abilities, and we need to find that. We need to search for that. But ultimately, where we also need to look is what are the needs of others in our communities. And those with an entrepreneurial way of looking at the world, they're hitting that sweet spot that's right there in the middle of that Venn diagram. They're looking out at the world, seeing what needs there are and problems that they can solve. And then they're thinking about their own interests and abilities and determining how they can fulfill those needs. And they're operating in that sweet spot. And that's how they think. They're constantly operating in that area. And when they're operating in that area, they're having to use these types of skills. We talk about empathy a lot. That goes with that needs of others piece of the puzzle there. You have to put yourself in someone else's shoes in order to understand how you can best solve their problems. You have to be very observant of the world around you and ask a lot of questions and try and dig down to the root of problems so that you can come up with a solution. Those that are entrepreneurial tend to experiment and adapt very quickly. They don't get stuck in a sort of regimented set of rules, only do things one way. They're always trying new things, which goes along with these ideas of creativity and critical thinking, where creativity, they're thinking about the possibilities that may lie out there in their world. And then with the critical thinking piece, they're analyzing those possibilities that they come up with in order to figure out, maybe what's the best or most appropriate solution to move forward with. They have to obviously communicate with those around them. To understand the needs of others, you have to talk to them. You have to get out in the world. You have to communicate your ideas to them and get that feedback. And then they have to work in collaborative ways with their teams to ultimately get to the point where they become effective problem solvers. And then finally, they, develop this ability for resourcefulness of using whatever they have. They become very agile, and they tend to be self-directed learners to where they're starting to figure out, like, okay, I don't know as much as I need to about this subject. I'm going to go and get that figured out. So to operate really effectively in that small little portion of the Venn diagram we were talking about, it really requires these skills, which I think many of you who are educators out there who are joining us today, these are the types of skills that we're looking to have our students walking away from whatever level of education that they're with, and then moving into the workforce. And it also goes to workforce readiness and preparing our workers to be able to have these types of skills. And from Eli's work perspective, we recognize that understanding how entrepreneurs look at the world can really help teach these types of skills through an experiential process, which we'll dive into a little bit more as we keep moving forward. So ultimately, the case we're making at Eli is that, in order to succeed in this world that we find ourselves in, and this world of the future that's being built every day with the rise of artificial intelligence and the quick pace of change in technology, and the interconnectivity of our world, it really is going to require everyone to have this ability to think like an entrepreneur, to be able to use those skills and develop those skills that we just discussed. And we like to frame this discussion with we think it's a really nice way of describing how the world has changed and why it's so important that entrepreneurial skills be put more broadly out into the world. So we refer to Thomas Friedman's 2016 book, Thank You for Being Late, where he talks about thriving in this age of accelerations and rapid change. And Friedman does a nice job of describing this discussion he had with Eric Astro Teller. I just used Astro Teller in the slide here, but who is the lead for research and development within Google. And so he's really looking, forward-looking as to what technology is going to be doing to our world here as we move forward. And Teller talks about the rate of change with technology and how it has moved at this exponential pace as we look back over time. And he also compares that to human adaptability. So let's talk about this for a second. When Teller describes, let's think about Rip Van Winkle in the year 1000. If fell asleep, wakes up 100 years later, there's probably not too much that's changed in the world. They're still going to find themselves being able to operate without too much trouble. But if we move forward, let's say to 1900, we start getting into a period where there's some change going on. We have the airplane, we've got the rise of the mass automobile production, we've got communication technologies with the telephone coming online, and all across the world, these things are starting to have an impact. However, usually as those technologies are coming online during this period, you have about 20 or 30 years for the systems that are affected by that, your legal systems, your educational systems, to adapt and create ways to deal with this constantly changing pace of technology and technological advancement. And what Teller's saying is now we're here, which is up above this capability that we as humans have to adapt. In the past, we could adapt over that 20 or 30-year period and integrate the new technology generation by generation. And now we're at this point where the pace of change and the continued pace of change with technology is exceeding our ability as humans to adapt. And this can create a lot of angst out in the world. And I think we see that today, that there's this constant fear of not being able to keep up with what's going on in the world. We see it in our students, we see it in our workers, we see it in our lawmakers, and our legal systems are just not able to keep up with the changes that are happening. And this, pace of change can be disorienting. However, if we think about it from this perspective, as Teller describes it, back in, the Rip Van Winkle, the example I gave, 1,000 to 1,100, that was that period of static stability. When we move into the 1900s, there was that occasional destabilization. Now we find ourselves in this period of constant destabilization, where we need to be in a period, have the ability to maintain our balance. And we need to get ourselves into a situation where we're in this state of dynamic stability. We have to constantly be in motion. It's just like riding a bike, right? If you're just sitting still on a bike, it's very easy to get tipped over or knocked off balance by the changes that are going on in the environment around you. But if you're moving forward, if you're constantly looking for new ways to adapt and overcome whatever obstacles you find, you're going to be fine if you're riding that bike and you're moving forward. So this is how Teller describes it, is being in this state of, we need to be constantly in this state of dynamic stability, because, it's not as Darwin described it, it's not the strongest or the most intelligent that survive, but the ones most responsive to that change in the environment that's going on around us. And so therefore we need to rewire our institutions and ultimately reinvent ourselves, be constantly looking for ways to improve ourselves in order to survive and thrive in this world that we find ourselves in. And so how Teller describes that we can do this from a human perspective is we need to learn faster and govern smarter. We have to bridge that gap, and we have to do it individually, because as a society, we know how difficult that's going to be to keep up on a large scale society. So we have to look at it from this individual perspective to help ourselves learn faster and try and push society to govern more smartly so that we can keep up with these changes. And ultimately what that means is we need to be optimized for learning, or we need to optimize ourselves for learning. And what that means is we need to be more agile and innovative and adaptive. We've ultimately got to learn to deal with ambiguity, and that's something that humans have a very difficult time doing. But there's good news here, and that is those that thrive in an ambiguous environment, where the rules aren't known, where you don't know what tomorrow holds, the types of people that work really well in those environments are entrepreneurs, and those who can think like entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial people. And so therefore that entrepreneurial mindset that we were beginning to talk about is optimized for learning and for, keeping us in this state of dynamic stability. And that's because the entrepreneurial mindset, as we discussed, is creative. It helps us with, developing our critical thinking skills. It helps us communicate. It helps us collaborate. And then ultimately it makes us very resilient. And because we know that entrepreneurs have been able to develop these skills by going through their entrepreneurial process. And we'll talk about that as we talk through the Ice House program. And ultimately, they're looking for how to use whatever resources they have to drive their ideas forward. So with this sort of, in our world, how we find ourselves today in the state of the world, we at Eli define entrepreneurial mindset in this way. This is the core assumption. What I have on the screen here is the core assumption of entrepreneurs, that ultimately it's their responsibility to figure out how to make themselves useful to others. Remember, they're looking for that sweet spot on that Venn diagram I showed. And in doing so, they empower themselves. It's ultimately getting their interests and abilities aligned with the needs of others and acting on that and moving forward in their lives. And what we see is that entrepreneurs are, as we talked about, they're masters of thriving in this ambiguous environment. And it's because they've become very strong at developing human agency. When you look at sort of behavioral characteristics, if you look at the work of Dr. Albert Bandura and all his work in talking about self-efficacy and ultimately bringing human agency to the forefront, what we see in entrepreneurs, this wheel is a set of effects that we see by people going through an entrepreneurial learning process. Ultimately, they have high levels of self-efficacy, that they believe that they can bring their ideas into the world and that they have the power to make it so. They have an internal locus of control where they recognize they're going to worry about things they can control, and they're going to not try and worry too much about the things they can't control. Entrepreneurs ultimately are driven by intrinsic motivation. The extrinsic motivators of carrots and sticks that we find in a lot of our institutions or our educational institutions with letter grades or with more money aren't the real driver for entrepreneurs. It's more about seeing their vision brought to life through their actions. Entrepreneurs become very resilient. As we know, when you're trying to bring an idea into the world, you're going to fail a lot, and that's okay. And we have to learn from those failures. So entrepreneurs become masters of being resilient and learning from those failures. And then finally, if you're familiar with the work of Dr. Carol Dweck at Stanford and her work with the growth mindset, she did a great job of describing the difference between a growth and a fixed mindset, where a fixed mindset feels like, oh man, I'm my ability to learn or my ability to understand this came on my hard drive of my brain, and I'm never going to be able to figure this out. Whereas a growth mindset is in a state of constant learning. You can constantly look outside and determine that you're going to be able to move forward and understand and learn. So if these are the effects that we're seeing in entrepreneurs, what we have to do is set up, as we were talking about, getting individuals trained and running them through process to ultimately help develop these skills that we're looking for them to have as they go out to be successful into the world. Okay, that's my 20 minutes on just some bits of philosophy behind our program. That's just small insights into the work that we do, but hopefully that gives you a pretty good perspective of our philosophy there. I'm going to take just a quick break, get a sip of water, and see if there's any questions I can answer about this portion of the program. Nick, is there anything out there I should be answering?
Sure. So we had one question from Douglas that I already partially answered, but I wanted to get your insights as well. Basically just asking for any other books or other, deep dive resources for the wannabe entrepreneur. I started off with Thinking Fast and Slow. And
Yes.
And then you, of course, referenced Thank You for Being Late. I also linked them to our resources page on our website, which is chock full of stuff like Albert Bandura, Dweck's work, things of that nature. But anything else that you have would be great.
Absolutely. And I was reading a little something. I'm not sure if you mentioned Dr. Martin Seligman's work at Penn with positive psychology. I know that may sound like it's a stretch for entrepreneurs, but it actually is a very good description of what it takes to thrive in the world, which is ultimately how entrepreneurs are trying to operate.
Sure. Jim Follett's asking if you could show the definition of entrepreneurial mindset again.
Absolutely. Let me put that up on the screen there. Got to share again. There we go. And Jim, if you can see that there, this is that core belief that they really are starting with. It's a starting point for them. And then from that, like we walk through in our programs, and I'll talk a little bit when I talk about lesson 1, this idea of a vision. So if I'm going to make myself useful to others, how am I going to do that? Where do I start? So it's a vision of how I can do that moving forward. Any other questions, Nick, before I press on to getting into the Ice House program?
Josh just asked for the first 3 slides. I'm assuming he means after the title slide, but
maybe what we can do, I know that everybody's going to get a copy of the slides afterwards, so
that's also true.
Yeah, maybe we'll just pass those out and make sure, and then if Josh has a specific question on those slides, just we can maybe hit that at the next stopping point.
There you go. Yeah, that works.
Okay. All right, well, let me move forward then to make sure we can get through the full presentation today. I want to next talk to you with that sort of description of the philosophy. I want to now let you know about our Ice House Entrepreneurship Program and sort of its genesis and what it's all about. All right. So our work began back in 2007 when our founder, Gary Schoniger, was asked by the Cisco Entrepreneur Institute to go and look at the entrepreneurial ecosystem because they were trying to impact and more fully develop that entrepreneurial ecosystem, because in the hopes that it would grow business startups, which, from a business perspective would help them sell their routers and, materials out to those new businesses. So they asked Gary to look at that entrepreneurial ecosystem. And when he did so, what became apparent was that nobody was talking about how entrepreneurs think. Everybody was talking about just the process of entrepreneurship, as I discussed, like business planning or financial aspects or legal parts. There was nothing in that entrepreneurial education system that was talking about the mindset and understanding how entrepreneurs think. So Gary went forth to go around the country and interview a couple hundred normal, everyday entrepreneurs. They weren't interested in looking at the Zuckerbergs and the Bransons and the Elon Musk with, a really high IQ folks. They wanted to focus on normal, everyday, that we see in every community entrepreneurs. And as he did that in 2008, he ran across a gentleman named Clifton Talbert. And he interviewed Clifton in 2008 initially in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in Clifton's office in Tulsa. And Clifton had an amazing story to tell. And Gary had heard these entrepreneurial stories about how people started with nothing and, were able to develop these, amazing things and brought value to their community. But when Clifton started talking, it just really hit home with Gary that he had the story that he could encapsulate all of these stories that he was hearing into a common sort of model. And in Clifton's story, as he told his story, when Gary asked him, like, who taught you to think like an entrepreneur, Clifton pulled this picture out of an old shoebox in his office and said, you know what, Gary, it was my uncle, Cleve Mormon. And he goes on to tell Gary the story of Cleve as how he, at Clifton, as a young teenager, had the opportunity to work for his Uncle Cleve when he was 13 years old. And prior to that point, Clifton, tells the story of everywhere he looked from his front porch, all he could see was cotton. And that was all that was expected of folks that looked like him in Glen Allen, Mississippi in the 1950s, was to work in the cotton fields. But Clifton's uncle looked at things differently. And he actually ran an ice house in the community. And it was from that ice house that he provided ice to everyone in the community, no matter their race or creed or background. He was providing that service to everyone in the community. And so Clifton goes on to tell the story that everything he learned that made him successful in life, he learned during that few-year experience in working for his uncle in the front of that International Harvester pickup, driving around delivering ice. And if you're not familiar with Clifton's story, he went on from that small town poverty situation. He was the son of a teenage mother, didn't know a father. And he went on to eventually become a Pulitzer Prize nominated author for another book he wrote called Once Upon a Time When We Were Colored. He lectured the Supreme Court. He ended up being the president of a bank. And you can blame him if you've ever been on a Stairmaster because he was one of the founders of the Stairmaster Corporation. So Clifton had this amazing story, and it all related to that time of understanding how to think like an entrepreneur from his Uncle Cleve. And when Gary heard that story, he was able to convince Clifton over some time to say, hey, let's co-author a book together and talk about your life story as a way to encapsulate all of these stories that Gary was hearing through his interviews of going around the country and interviewing unlikely entrepreneurs. And that turned into the Who Owns the Ice House? 8 Life Lessons from an Unlikely Entrepreneur book, which has now spawned this crazy train that we're on with Eli in trying to spread this message for entrepreneurial mindset around the world. And what happened as that book was being written, the Kauffman Foundation found out about the work and helped to develop our original edition of the Ice House Entrepreneurship Program, which was designed to expand upon the concepts that are talked about in the book for people to understand the entrepreneurial mindset. And from that original edition, there was a small business edition created. Then in 2015, our student success version was put together. And just a few weeks ago, we completed development of our Ice House Middle School edition. And, with the idea of it being used for a set of younger population at the middle school age. And I'll talk to you a little bit about some examples of how that's being done. And as the course was developed, it had a number of objectives I want to tick through for you. So the first was to make entrepreneurship accessible to everyone. So in line with our philosophy that we're not trying to be Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg, we're trying to apply those lessons of everyday entrepreneurs and take those things that are common and replicable that anybody can learn. Those skills like we talked about, the empathy, the communication, the critical thinking, take those things and make that accessible to everyone through a lens of entrepreneurship. And we wanted to inspire students with real world examples. Behavior change is very difficult. And unless you can come up with socially relatable models, folks that come from a similar or worse background and have somehow been able to overcome whatever the world throws at them, it can be very difficult for people to change their behavior. So we wanted to use real world examples, and we'll talk about how that's done. We ultimately wanted the program to be engaging and active and experiential. So as part of the program, students of the program all go through a basic entrepreneurial process themselves, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We focus on the mindset, so it is applicable across the board, and we're not just talking about folks wanting to start a business. That's great if they want to do that, and we have a lot of folks that continue down the path and do that. But if they never start a business, and if they go on to work for an established corporation or a government or whatever the case may be, they're still going to be successful by building these skills. We wanted the program to connect the classroom and community, because entrepreneurs thrive in an environment where they're supported with other entrepreneurs, other folks that are maybe thinking outside the box, looking at things differently. So we needed to connect the students in the classroom to their community. And then finally, we knew we couldn't scale the program if we were going to rely on entrepreneurs to teach it. So the way our program is designed is it can be delivered in one of two ways. You can either become a facilitator of our program, and I'll talk a little bit about that, where you go through our training and we train you over a few day in-person training to facilitate the program. Or we now have, in the last year, we've developed a self-paced program that will at least step you through the concepts and the experiential piece to where you can really start to understand the entrepreneurial mindset more deeply. And the way the course is structured is really on 3 legs. The first is what we'll call our opportunity discovery process. So that's the experiential part of the program that I'll describe for you. Then we take those Ice House Entrepreneur interviews, and that becomes the socially relatable model piece. It's those other folks talking about their stories that can help relate it through that storytelling to help relate to that student. And then finally, there's content around each of the 8 life lessons. So that content falls into the 8 life lessons, and it's rigorous curriculum that falls underneath that content. Now, that first leg we're talking about, that opportunity discovery process, begins with students utilizing this Ice House Opportunity Discovery Canvas, which is just a really basic entrepreneurial process of identifying a problem that you're interested in, the problem finding and analysis, looking at through an empathic lens, then you might stay in that process for weeks or months or years even until you really have that problem very well defined. We never want folks to jump right to a solution. That's a recipe for failure, the sort of build it and they will come mentality. You have to go out into the world and figure out what problem you're solving before you come up with a solution. So then they go through that process of forming solutions. And then ultimately, once they have something through micro experimentation where they've played around with their solution enough and know that it will work, then they have to get it out to the world and communicate to others and talk about their concept and get it out into the world. And that's that connection piece. And we have, a rigorous background on this canvas with questions that the students have to answer and a whole process that they go through as part of the program. The second leg, those case studies or the relatable social models that I was discussing, come from those interviews that Gary did through his work with Cisco and others that have been expanded upon since then. So it's folks like Don Halfacre, who's on the top left here, who was a severely wounded veteran during the Iraq War, who came back and through essentially becoming resilient through the trouble that she had had and her injuries that she had had, was able to overcome that and now runs a company of 175 people. Jason there, who's the second individual, foster student or foster kid for many, many years, horrible GPA in high school, on a really bad path. And then through an entrepreneurial experience of running his own, cleaning business, cleaning construction sites, essentially through that and through mentorship turned his life around and, is now a graduate of San Francisco State University. And on down the line, Rodney Walker, if you were at the NACCE conference recently, you might have seen him speak. He does an amazing discussion of how he's gone from, the south side of Chicago, essentially in a really, really rough situation, homeless at times, a foster child for like 14 foster homes, but getting himself through an entrepreneurial experience and mentorship to a point where now he's graduated from Morehouse with his bachelor's, Yale with his master's, and Harvard. He's finalizing his PhD. And on down the line are other examples there that are all in the program. And these are just a small sample of all of our Ice House entrepreneurs. Now, this third leg of the Ice House program falls in line with that content. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the 8 life lessons so you can get an understanding of what the type of content goes into. The baseline of this entrepreneurial method, going back to that question about how entrepreneurs make themselves useful to others and therefore empower themselves, entrepreneurs are choosing to do this. They're making that choice of setting that vision out on the horizon and moving towards that. So we talk a lot about the vision process and about how ultimately you're making that choice to move forward in the first lesson. In the second lesson, we talk about the concept. It's built around this idea that problems are opportunities. If people have a problem out there, that's an opportunity for you to solve it. So when you've got your radar up and you're recognizing those problems and analyzing those problems, it can open up opportunity for you. And if you can start micro-experimenting, entrepreneurs tend to just go ahead and start working on things. They don't business plan for 24 months before they get going. They start micro-experimenting and trying little ideas to see how they can move their ideas forward. They immediately start taking action on those things. And ultimately, they have to go in order to know. And when they're pursuing their ideas, they're also going to run across knowledge that they need to pick up. And this is where we've seen through our work, those of you who are educators out there, this is where it becomes very engaging for the student, because most students, I've been in a high school classroom, I've been in a college classroom, my wife's a high school teacher. We know how difficult it is to engage students on a daily basis in whatever subject it is. But when you make that connection with what they're learning to something that they're intrinsically motivated to pursue, it's an opportunity that they see for themselves that they've been working on, it really helps them drive forward in their academic pursuits. So for instance, if you've got someone who is trying to bring their idea forward and out into the world, And they had to take that accounting class in the past, and they never really understood why. Now, as they're trying to, bring that idea out into the world, they're seeing that, wow, I really need to understand these accounting concepts because it's going to help me bring my idea forward. And ultimately, what that creates is this sort of engine of entrepreneurship where you're seeing these opportunities, you're starting to act on them. Through those actions, you're recognizing what you need to learn. As you learn new things, you recognize new opportunities, you act on those, and you learn new things. And it creates this sort of positive flywheel that starts throwing off our other 8 core concepts, the last 4 of the 8 core concepts, such as creating wealth. And that's how it's described in our original program. In our student success program, we changed that concept to resourcefulness because that's really what we were getting at, where we don't want people to think of wealth as only monetary. We want to see it as more well-being. And when you're creating well-being, you're utilizing your time in the most effective way. You're utilizing whatever money you have in the most effective way. You're utilizing the people that you're around in the most effective way, and you're utilizing your attention. You're not just playing Candy Crush or sitting around watching TV. You're actually trying to move your ideas forward. And that's what's talked about in lesson 5. In lesson 6, we used in our original program the concept of building your brand. And, ultimately what that is about is reliability. And we're showing how when other people are relying on you for you to solve their problems, you have to be reliable. So we talk about that in lesson 6. In lesson 7, it's all about understanding, creating that positive community of influence, of getting away from those who are dragging you down, that are keeping you from pursuing your vision, and building that positive community that can help and support you. And then finally, as I sort of already mentioned, it's very common for entrepreneurs to fail. And you have to understand and push through, have that grit and persistence to push through when you fail. And so that's what's talked about in lesson 8. Okay, with that, that's my next pause spot here before we get finally into how Ice House has impacted others around the world. Nick, are there any questions that I can answer from maybe this understanding of the program?
Yeah, so just a couple of questions, some of which you'll cover later on, so I'll just highlight them to make sure you hit on those points. But we have one question from Jeff Stuber asking about the best ways to engage with the course in a community college entrepreneurship program setting. Okay. So you'll be talking about training and the things that go along with that in a little bit, I'm sure. Just wanted to highlight that. And then Douglas had a question for us as well, talking about if he as an individual wants to engage with the course as is. So definitely wanting to make sure that we highlight some of those different options for folks.
Okay, absolutely. I will hit on both of those.
And then Rhoda has a really good, insightful question here. How do students tend to respond to the idea of resourcefulness?
That one we hear has a great impact on people because, lots of times we think of sort of the traditional resourcefulness from the perspective of, everybody has probably heard the saying, well, it takes money to make money. And there's something in that says, okay, yeah, I mean, that's a point being, if you have money, you have resources, you can start pushing your ideas forward more quickly. But like we have shown through our research, sometimes money can make you pretty stupid. Like if you're just going to throw money at a problem rather than truly digging into the root and solving the problem, you're not going to come up with the most effective solution, and you may end up failing in the long run. So when we start talking about these concepts of resourcefulness with students, we start to break down that idea of it. Well, you have to have the resources in order to move forward. It's like, no, start with what you have. Just start micro experimenting. Think of ways that you can take what you have, built a very simple idea of your solution, and getting that out into the world, whatever that is. Whether it's a typical entrepreneurial method or solution you're trying to bring, like a product, or whether that's just something that you're trying to get to change your organization, maybe some new way of doing business. Get it out there, start talking to people about it, use those resources. And I think what also resonates with people is the idea that the other resources that we don't think about. We don't think about our time a lot. I mean, all of us say, well, oh, man, we're so busy. You know, I myself, I've got 3 kids. They're older now, but man, over my life, it was like, oh, I never have time for that. But we do have time in the margins many times that we can start, you know, to move our ideas forward. So it's those types of things I think that really resonate with our students as those types of concepts are brought forward.
Great.
All right. So let me run through, and then we'll do one last question session here. But let me go through the impact of the program itself. So I can just give you a few snapshots into how the program has been used by some around the world. So as Nick mentioned, one methodology for getting involved with our program that has been very successful is to become a trained facilitator of our courseware, of our Ice House Entrepreneurship Program. So as you can see here, we're up over 2,300 trained facilitators since we began in 2011. Virtually all 50 states, there might be 1 or 2 we're missing, and a couple dozen countries around the world we have trained facilitators in. And we have about 10 to 12,000 students a year, depending on the year, that are going through our programs that are being taught by these facilitators. We do have a self-paced program that I'll talk about. It's new. And so we have around 100 students at this point who have gone through that program self-paced. So I think we did have a question about that. I'll talk a little bit about that. You can take the course on your own now, but our historical model has been this process of going through to become a trained facilitator. And this is just a snapshot, a small snapshot of the types of organizations that we've worked with just really over the last year. I think all of these are current clients that we have utilizing the program in some fashion. And you'll see from that list, we're covering folks everywhere from a middle school, high school level through the traditional college education, community colleges, 4-year universities, from a economic development perspective, specific groups like veterans or small business development centers who are actively working with folks starting businesses. We've got folks in prison or having just left prison that are going through reentry programs, learning how to think like entrepreneurs. Workforce development programs, we have a lot of work going on there right now to retrain workers and to help them become viable in these workplaces if they're finding themselves out of work. We have folks using it as a learning and development platform within, specifically like Albuquerque, I'm going to talk about within their city government. And then nonprofit organizations have used it to integrate this way of entrepreneurship into their way of operating so that they're not just thinking about grants as the only way to fund their way forward. Many times nonprofits get stuck just relying on grants and helping them look for other ways. So just some examples of how the program's been used. And if you've heard about us, you may have seen some of these articles. These have happened over the last decade or so. We've been noted on lots of press out there. We're sort of constantly in the news in local communities when folks are running programs. But we've also had this worldwide spread. The program, when it was created, was presented at the UN General Assembly. It's been presented at the European Commission and the Papal Council for Peace and Justice. So the Alan Gray Orbis Foundation in South Africa, Gary has spoke at it a number of times, and we're starting to have an impact in South Africa. So we're not, I guess, fly-by-night type organization. We've been around and we've been doing this for a while and have a deep understanding here. So let me talk to you about some specific examples. This is a little snapshot, just a picture, a still picture from a video that was taken of students in Erie, Pennsylvania, in their middle schools. And Erie's, an interesting spot. They've had a rough couple decades as the changing world has led to most of their heavy industry having moved to either other states or other countries. And so it's put what was once a thriving, economically vibrant community, has put them in really tough straits over the last few decades. And so Erie is trying to inject this entrepreneurial mindset throughout their community, but they're really concentrating on the youth. And so what they decided to do was expose all their 7th grade to the Ice House program. And so they're using it in their social studies curriculum. They're using the book in combination with the social studies teachers over the 4th quarter. They're running them through the Ice House Student Success Program. And they're having amazing results. The teacher, the assistant superintendent, B. Habersky, we've presented on this over the last few years in Pennsylvania at their annual conference. We're just planning to do that again coming up. But there's a great video out there called the Ice House Project in Erie Public Schools. If you look that up, you'll see these quotes from their students. And we love this one from Madison because it really gets to the root of what we're trying to do about changing those problems into opportunities to make their location a better place, wherever that is. From a high school level, I want to talk about our relationship with Prepa Tech. So if you're familiar with Tecnológico de Monterrey, they are a university that is throughout Mexico, and they're considered the MIT of Latin America, very well respected. And they have an amazing vision for their future where students have a humanistic outlook and an entrepreneurial mindset to become competitive in the world. They have a prep school that is at 37 campuses throughout Mexico. And we've been working with them over the last 4 years now for 7,500 students a year to be going through the program. And as you can see, the types of skills that are being found when they do their surveys at the end, where students are developing and applying these 21st century skills, they're really getting to the root of what entrepreneurship is all about. We have a report, it's about a 30-page report that was done on the first year of our work with Prepa Tech that we'd be happy to send you afterwards if you'd like more information. And that's just one example. We have many high schools who are using it in typical entrepreneurship classes or embedding the ideas in some of the other classes, and we can talk to you about those as well offline. Now, the community college, I know we had a question on community college entrepreneurship programs. So before I talk about this Pikes Peak example, I want to answer that question very quickly. One of our larger uses of the program is in entrepreneurship, essentially, usually Entrepreneurship 101 courses, both at the community college and university level. And faculty members are taking these ideas behind the entrepreneurial mindset and embedding that. Either they're using the full curriculum, it was originally designed as a full 3 credit hour course. If there's enough material there, you can do that. Or they're just supplementing materials that they already have to make sure that these mindset concepts come across to their entrepreneurship students. So that's the largest way on an individual basis where that's happening. In this example, I want to talk about how our entrepreneurship, the Ice House program, was used to increase student persistence. And how this all sort of came to being is, and I was at Pikes Peak Community College when this was happening, and my dean, Bree Langamo, became familiar with the Ice House program and went to the training, the same training I was talking about previously out in Kansas in around 2014. And when she did that, she came back and said, you know what, I've been working on programs for years with the Gates Foundation, all these initiatives that are out there to try and keep students in college. And I don't think any of them would be as effective at having students connect with why they're going back to college in the first place and helping them persist through the community college. So what was decided to be done, you see Dr. Bolton here, is he made the decision that, you know what, we have an existing student success curriculum that was pretty much aligned with typical curriculum in that space, which is, note-taking, study skills, how to navigate the library, how to get online, with the Blackboard, etc. He said, okay, we're going to take that program, we're going to do a blind study and use the Ice House program for all of our developmental students, all of our students who are not math or English ready based on their AccuPlacer scores. So they took 1,600 students, randomly assigned them to the courses. When this was done, they kept the data afterwards to see on student persistence, And the Ice House course, the students who took that persisted to the spring semester at a rate of 83%. Whereas the students who took the other course, the sort of typical student success course, only persisted at 55%, which is pretty much in line with sort of typical college. They had a few percent uptick from folks that didn't take the course. So bottom line, it made such a huge impact on student persistence that they implemented that program for a few more years after that and saw some great results. Also in the community college space, we have a large initiative going on right now. We've trained about 60 educators from the community college system across West Virginia. All of the 9 community colleges in West Virginia have signed the NACCE pledge to be entrepreneurial, more entrepreneurial in their methodologies and in their schools. So we've implemented a program to train their faculty members and staffs. And now we're just starting some courses there with their students. So that's moving forward as we speak. In the learning and development space, I need to talk quickly about Albuquerque. So for folks who think that government employees can't think like entrepreneurs, Tom Darling would be able to change your mind. He came from Central New Mexico Community College, where he was teaching the Ice House program. And he was brought over to the city to run their learning and development programs within their HR department. And he now bases their training around the entrepreneurial mindset. So they have 6,000 city employees that are scheduled to go through the program. They're up somewhere between 600 or 700 right now. And they're seeing some amazing results. We have examples in an ebook that we can also provide you a link to, and we will provide you a link to in the follow-up. But things like their recycling, they were losing about $50 a ton on their recycling. And when their truck drivers, their drivers who were driving the recycling trucks driving around, they gave them this program. They got them thinking like entrepreneurs about how they could do their job better. They were able to change that from losing $50 a ton to now making about $2 a ton. Just one example that is out there and talked about by Tom. And then my last example of many that are out there is this work we're doing in North Carolina right now. This is a picture of, I believe this was our first cohort of trainees in North Carolina. We're working with a foundation there called NC Idea. And NC Idea has as a goal to help spread entrepreneurship all across North Carolina. And they recognize that the entrepreneurial mindset is really the key to tapping into the rural communities where they don't necessarily have access to all the resources that you might find in Charlotte or in the Triangle in Raleigh-Durham. So it's helping them expand their footprint with entrepreneurship. As they get this program rolled out, they've hosted 2 trainings. We're getting ready to do another one in December. So if you're from North Carolina and you're interested in coming to that training, I believe they're still accepting applications for that. We can get you in contact with them. But even beyond that, they're committed to getting this mindset out to the state. So their goal is to get 100,000 individuals infected with this entrepreneurial mindset throughout North Carolina. So there's some great things going on there, but it's all based on that foundation deciding like, this is how we're going to economically develop our state, and we're going to put the resources against that. All right. That's just some examples of how our work is going on around the world. We had that one question, Nick, about the self-paced, like how can I just go ahead and take the course rather than going through a facilitator process? So for that individual, you can go right to our website. If you go to, there's one of the sliders that will go by, it will have this image and you can just click Enroll Now. It'll take you to our Entrepreneurial Mindset Academy that we're currently building out, where you can enroll directly into a self-paced version of the course. And that course is $199. And it's, you'll see when you see the volume of material there, it's well worth it there. For our training, if you're interested in our upcoming facilitator trainings, we're just a few weeks away from our next one. Our next public training in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, just north of Philadelphia, November 11th through the 13th. So if you're interested in joining us there, you can follow up with us afterwards and we'll provide information for you. That training is a 3-day training. It runs right at $2,000. It's $1,995. They get you certified in our Ice House programs. Well, that's all I have for my portion of the presentation. I'd like to see if we have any other questions. I might just add on, Nick, I don't think I mentioned, we're also, constantly, when I talk about facilitator training, if you have like 15 people, we can come on site to your location and then the price is reduced for each individual. It's only $1,000 per person in order to go through the training. So that's also a big part of our travel schedule, what keeps us pretty busy traveling around to do that. All right, what questions do you see out there, Nick?
So there's a great one from John that you specifically would be the expert on answering. So I left that one hanging for you, which
okay.
When John read the book, Who Owns the Ice House, he saw it as very much a leadership development piece. And he was wondering what's similar, different, or unique about that leadership development versus entrepreneurship development. And I thought you would have with your leadership background, would have a really good insight into that.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Nick. And yeah, John, that's an amazing insight. It's actually how I got involved with this program. My background is in leadership development from the Air Force. I was a 21-year Air Force officer, and at the end of my career, the last 8 years or so, I worked in developing leaders for the Air Force. So when I saw this program and what it could do, I saw those overlaps immediately. So the similarities, there are many. I mean, if you look at those 8 life lessons with, that power of choice of driving a vision forward, that's what leaders do. They set that vision out there. They don't see problems as ways to stop them. They develop that team to turn that problem into an opportunity. Leaders are forward moving. They take action. They're constantly learning. So there's so many similarities there. And I don't even know if I could break apart and say, well, this applies to entrepreneurship and this applies to leadership, because there really is so many overlaps. I think it's just how we look at it through a lens. And, our work at Eli, we're using entrepreneurs as an example, and we're using those lessons from them and applying that more broadly, just like if we're taking leaders as examples and sort of the biography of leaders and applying that more broadly. So I love that insight, because that's exactly how I got involved with the program. Let's see.
Okay, we've got another question about trainings, or actually, before we go there, just digging a little deeper into the re-entry component, a little deeper into how folks are using it in a re-entry space.
Sure. So as one example, the Justine Peterson is a nonprofit organization. I believe they're based out of St. Louis. And a few years ago now, they got a grant from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation to provide training in entrepreneurship to recently incarcerated folks who had just been released. And so they recognized, number one, that entrepreneurship can provide a strong way for someone who's coming out of that type of environment where they really might not see much opportunity for themselves. And many employers have a hard time hiring someone, who's been in that situation. So they saw entrepreneurship as a way out. And so what they've done is they had a number of folks that came to our training. They're now certified facilitators. And they're taking those folks that they're seeing in that program through the Ice House program as a way to not just teach them about entrepreneurship, but to help them develop that mindset to overcome whatever's held them back in the past and get that behavior change going that they need to move them forward. That's just one example. We got the work of Dr. Linda Keena down at Ole Miss. She's worked with the prison in the area actually where Clifton Talbert is from. It's sort of an amazing parallel there. And she's had some great results with zero recidivism for the folks that she's had in her class, like the 25 folks from that. And we can give you more details on that and get you connected with those folks if you got more questions.
Another insightful question from Rhoda. What is the greatest mindset changing challenge for participants during the certification course? So folks actually getting trained.
Yeah, so that's a good point as well. What we find is that, we focus lots of times on, oh, this is going to be great for our students, or we're going to do these things for our students. What we really find when we go and do these trainings is that it's as impactful, if not more impactful, on the people as they're going, the individuals as they're going through the training, whether they be teachers, faculty members, economic developers, whatever, because it looks at things like maybe they never have before. And I think the things that tend to hit home for people are the concepts around locus of control, of not just worrying about those things you can't control, trying to just focus on what you can. The ideas around reacting, like how reactive we've become, and especially in this world of social media and where we find ourselves today politically and everything that's going on in the world, we tend to react versus truly responding and thinking thoughtfully through things. And so those sort of initial lessons, I think, really hit people pretty hard when we start talking about them. And then the concept of learned helplessness comes up, and we talk about this idea, because I think a lot of us fall into that in some parts of our lives. I've gotten a little bit older. I don't like technology sometimes, and I can become sort of learned helpless in how, like, oh, I'll never be able to learn how to do that. And when you look at it from another lens of, no, you can master that. You just have to, take the time to do it and work through it. And so when we talk about learned helplessness, that always seems to resonate with people as well. So those are the ones that come straight to mind. I mean, it's always something that for each individual, but those are the ones that come up right now. Let's see.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Quick question about bringing Ice House or the entrepreneurial mindset to the Middle East. I gave a brief answer saying that we are developing currently a blended online version of training that would help with the intention of making it more accessible to folks with travel restrictions or financial restrictions for getting us out there. But we have had some folks from the Middle East trained and are always happy to have further discussions on that. I gave Faiz our email addresses so that we can continue that conversation.
Great. Yeah. And I'm happy that you mentioned the blended training that we're developing. I mentioned that online training, or the in-person training that we're doing in Philadelphia in next month. In February is what we're shooting for right now. We're planning on a blended training where you'll be able to consume the full course through that self-paced version, and then have 4 get-togethers with Gary and I to go over the concepts that we would cover during that training. And it's going to be our first time trying this. We haven't done it before, but especially for folks that are overseas, or as Nick mentioned, with travel restrictions, might be a really good methodology. We get so much feedback that people love coming in person to our training. We're a little bit like, let's see how this is going to work, but we're excited to give it a shot, because we know we can make it impactful even through this type of environment where we're just meeting, over the internet.
Absolutely. I just want to...
I see a question about more on Pikes Peak beyond the case study. Do you know, Rhoda was asking about that. Did you answer that one?
Yeah, so I was saying we would touch base on that because the case study is
more.
Yep. Yep.
Great.
Josh, unfortunately, we are more in line with training folks who would act as mentors. What I would say is, if you're interested in engaging with us specifically, coming to the experts, as you might say, that is a great use of coming to our in-person or blended training. A lot of folks who use the training are certified to use the course, but then can actually use it as a professional development piece for themselves. In fact, that 15-person private training that Rob was talking about, that's often how a lot of folks frame it, as professional development for staff or faculty in different institutions.
Yeah, that's right. And if, Josh, if you're, I'm not sure where you're at, but we may be able to link you in with a current Ice House facilitator. And that might be someone, you can link with and, form that relationship as well. In Phoenix. Okay. Yeah, I know Arizona, we've got a number of facilitators at the community colleges in Arizona. So we'll see how we can link you up. Just shoot, when Nick sends that follow-up, just shoot him an email afterwards and we can get you linked up.
Yeah, definitely. Any other questions that y'all might have, my email is nic@elimindset.com, and I'll be the one sending the follow-up within the next 24 hours once the recording of this is rendered and processed. And then you'll be getting the slides, this, as well as a slew of other links to help answer any questions you have.
Did you see Bruce's question, Nick? He might have just sent it.
Did.
Once one becomes certified, is there ongoing support to build a practice? So Bruce, what we provide after the certification training is you're going to have a suite of resources that are essentially facilitator materials, facilitator guides. You're going to have access to some of the course materials. Once you are teaching the course, then you have access to all the materials. But the follow-on support that we give is we do try and help our facilitators by linking them to others who are maybe trying to do similar things so that you can learn from them. We're trying to more develop a facilitator network where people can pass around, in our college environments, we have people that have, syllabi created. We have folks that are doing it like a boot camp process or maybe a 2-week process over the summer. So we really try and do a strong job of connecting you with others. We've got over 2,000 facilitators. So trying to say, hey, yeah, we can link you with somebody who's doing that to where you can learn from them. We try and provide that ongoing support. And then we're always looking to help push and promote folks that are teaching our program. So if you wanted to run a course, we'd have no problem on social media pushing that out to the world or maybe putting things in our newsletter, those types of things.
And then we just got a nice reference from Douglas about developing remote courses and workforces in general. So Douglas, thank you very much. That'll be helpful as we're developing that program, but also we are recently transitioning to a more remote workforce. So that's just helpful as well. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, I know we're a little bit over time with questions. I don't mind. I've got time. So if anybody's got anything more, you can absolutely let us know. But if we're running out of questions.
It seems to be that way. If we do miss anyone as we're signing off, I see some coming up. Definitely shoot us an email. Or you can always give our office a call. It'll be myself or one of my coworkers, Joni, answering. So we're always happy to help.
Okay. Well, I'm starting to see some thank yous, and we definitely appreciate your time and for hanging out with us today. Oh, Faiz has a question, so let me make sure we can answer his question.
I think that Faiz may be saying, hold on, and asking another question.
Okay, that's fine. All right, well, Nick and I will stick around for another few minutes, but if you've joined us today and need to drop off, we definitely understand. So have a great rest of your week and hope to hear from you soon.
Great to hear, David. Thanks for the shining review.
Oh yeah, that's very nice. Thank you. Okay, Faiz, I see your question here. So let's figure out a way to connect. Get with Nick afterwards, and we can see if we need to set up a call to discuss in more detail. We can definitely do that.
And I'm just typing out my email again, so you have that. Perfect. Right.
You're welcome, Destiny. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. We are as well, Faiz. Yes. Definitely looking forward to speaking with you as well.
All right. Well,
All right,
I think
everyone.
with that, Nick, yeah, we can probably close it out.
Yep. All right. Anyone who's still on, you'll be getting a follow-up within the next 24 hours. Thank you so much.
Okay, and thank you, and you guys have a great rest of the week.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.